So, on the eve of the coronation of King Charles III, we have come at last to the end of the end of the reign of Queen Elizabeth II. The end, in fact, of the Second Elizabethan Age, as we might perhaps come to know it in retrospect. She might also be remembered, if the Pfeffel Johnson suggestion catches on, as Elizabeth the Great. That might be a nice legacy. Elizabeth had been on the throne for 15 years before I was born, so like the great majority of my compatriots up until now, I have known no other sovereign. And that's a strange feeling. Since she has been monarch for the entirety of my life, it's felt as if she might actually be there forever. And I think that we British might have underestimated that feeling of change, since we have not had to endure radical change in the way that some other countries have. Britain hasn't been invaded for 957 years and hasn't really lost a war since the American War of Independence, which, although it ended in defeat, it never led to subjugation. Many other countries have had to contend with the collapse of their system, like the former communist regimes of the old Soviet bloc. Countries like France, Afghanistan, Iraq and Ukraine have been invaded by outside aggressors. Others, like Lebanon and Sudan, have had decades-long civil wars. And even in the rare instances where momentous change has been ordered, like in the case of Czechoslovakia, it has still resulted in the splitting of a country. Of course, officially nothing has really changed. The line of succession immediately kicked in as the protocol was observed as planned, and we, from a legal point of view, have seamlessly acquired a new monarch in the person of King Charles III, formerly the Prince of Wales. But it doesn't seem like that. It really doesn't. It seems as if something has passed, rather than just somebody. Maybe it's just my sense of dread and low-level paranoia, but it feels as if a final obstacle has been removed, and a, dare I say it, new order is being ushered in. For many of us, this anxiety comes from Charles's long-time association with the dreaded, shadowy World Economic Forum, and what seems like a deliberate long-term strategy of grooming the future king by the group's creepy founder, Klaus Schwab. It is hoped that Charles's intervention in many areas, which often comes close to politics, may not be tolerated by the establishment as king, as it was when he was merely the Prince of Wales. But that, of course, assumes that the interests of the establishment are different to the interests of the king. And it's more than obvious that the interests of the British establishment, the WEF, and a new king are in almost perfect alignment. After more than 3 years in which we saw ancient rights, constitutional norms and protections steamrolled by the COVID hysterics, I don't think we can rely overmuch on the niceties of the constitutional settlement. The king will only be prevented from meddling in politics when that meddling is at variance with net zero, the WEF, and the Westminster duopoly. All his pronouncements in favour of the narrative, like climate change, will be amplified and trumpeted as his solemn duty. But after the spasm of COVID was followed seamlessly by the distraction of Ukraine, which was in turn followed, if you remember, by the climate emergency of 2 very hot days, as measured in close proximity to the exhaust of numerous gas turbines on the tarmac at Heathrow Airport, the end of the 70-year reign of our head of state provided them with another distraction with its 2 weeks or so of mourning. And I'm not suggesting that such a long tenure shouldn't be commemorated and the crowning of a new monarch celebrated, but if you wanted to take attention away from the highest ever energy bills, the inconvenient harms of a certain enthusiastically promoted medical intervention or the ever-expanding surveillance state, and its corresponding restrictions on personal freedom in the form of LTNs, ULEZ, and the so-called 15-minute cities, well, you know. Much has been written about and commented on regarding the King's forthcoming oath, and the corresponding oath of allegiance that we, as a population, are being invited to take. so I've not much to add since I'm not up to date on the details. But it feels to me that some of us, and I mean the British in general, are really feeling the need to believe in something at the moment, something better than we've had before. I've noticed that many people are looking towards, or at least becoming interested in, religion. I include myself in that, although I have no clue as to whether that is the right path or not. I have no faith as such, and sometimes envy those who do, but I have seriously begun to realise that our society, our generally good society, has become degraded and poisoned by something, and I can't help feeling that that something is the result of society, to employ a common phrase, having turned away from God. Is it just nostalgia that we believe that our society was better then than it is now? I don't think so. For most of us who care about such things, and there are many who do not remember, it may just be a slippage in the general quality of our lives. It may not be catastrophic, but just a gradual dirtying of things. More traffic, slobbishly dressed people, bad language, fewer and fewer British-made things, smaller and smaller homes, uglier public buildings, more and more and more television adverts, along with moronic television programmes, even more moronic MPs like Angela Rayner and Jess Phillips, and amoral ones like Matt Hancock, Jeremy Hunt and Tobias Elwood, is maybe what is driving that nostalgia. For others, that degradation is more serious. The replacement of skilled jobs with call centre work, or the replacement of any job with no work at all and a life living on disability benefits, the likelihood of an old age in poverty for older people with nothing to hand down to the younger generation, who will themselves be looking forward to owning nothing and who will, likely as not actually be happy about it. For others still, the degradation is very definitely catastrophic. For thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of young women and girls, children in fact, who were thrown to the wolves of the Muslim rape gangs and were then subsequently told that it was a consequence of their own choices. That an 11-year-old can choose to be gang raped and sodomised by scores of grown men, and yet the machinery of justice scarcely trembles. I can't say, but I can ask the question, would a society that had God at the centre of it allow such things to happen? The Stephen Frys of this world like to point to things like bone cancer in children as proof that God does not exist, and if he does, then he is not to be respected if he allows such things. But that only follows if you believe that God is all-powerful. But perhaps he isn't. Perhaps he does good things, like make human beings, but perhaps he makes mistakes like everyone else. A human being is an extremely complicated machine. Can it be reasonable to expect that of all the billions of people on earth, everyone is perfect? But of course that isn't what most religious people believe about God. Most of them, as far as I can tell, believe that he does not make mistakes. If they believe that, it really does play into the hands of the Stephen Frys and the Richard Dawkinses of this world. Unless one points to the numerous examples in the Bible when individuals and whole populations are punished by God, that is. Perhaps the rape of our country's children is punishment. Perhaps in some way we deserve it. Of course the girls themselves didn't deserve it, despite what many policemen and counsellors believed, not to mention the perpetrators themselves. But perhaps we deserve it. Perhaps we deserve it on our consciences. Perhaps we overestimated the forgiving nature of God and underestimated his wrath. When faced with the horror of something like the rape gangs, it is only natural that we think in terms of good and evil. And if we can identify what is evil, we should be able to point to what is good. But maybe it's not as easy as that. The devil is clever, cleverer than us, it seems. When homosexuality was decriminalised in the late 60s, nobody could have foreseen where it would lead. What was undoubtedly the overturning of a cruel and vindictive denying of a small minority's essential nature has led to the lifelong physical mutilation of countless thousands of confused, or perhaps merely gay, young people. It was, in its way, an expression of a society that could afford to be compassionate to those who were different. But we've come a long, long way from that. There was no reason why decriminalisation of homosexuality had to lead to the cutting off of breasts and penises of healthy 15-year-olds. But it did. That good thing that happened in the year of my birth in 1967 led to the undeniably evil thing that is euphemistically called gender-affirming care. 55 years from good to unspeakable evil. Likewise, the Race Relations Act of a couple of years before began as an admirable impulse to protect black people from being called the N-word in the street. I would use the full word in all its ugliness, but I'll be censured by YouTube. Just like the last time I used it as reportage in my "There Are Worse Things Than Racism" post, which may have hobbled the growth of this channel when I released it over 5 years ago. But I digress. The Race Relations Act, like the Sexual Offences Act mentioned above, was a good thing, but it has now led to where nobody except perhaps the devil himself could ever have imagined. We now have people being arrested for praying, and praying silently on the street. Attempting to protect black people from verbal abuse in the street had led not only to the criminalisation, potentially, of any speech, it is now even extended to the realm of silent, non-verbal prayer. Thought crime, in fact. Only an idiot or a totalitarian megalomaniac would believe that this isn't an evil thing. So the coronation of a new monarch should be something to be embraced. It should be viewed as a new chapter in our island story, an opportunity, if I can paraphrase the King's own words, to reflect and reimagine our society. It should be possible. It should, in fact, be the default position to clear away the dead wood that has accumulated over the past 7 decades, to re-establish the many noble principles that this country was built on. Freedom of speech, the rule of law, enforced without fear or favour, the right to privacy in one's private life, and anonymity in public has been so badly violated by the ballooning of the surveillance state, the freedom to worship and observe one's faith, for Christians in particular, as well as for those of other faiths, the idea of service for those employed by the state, whether they be politicians, civil servants, or even dustmen. But not a whisper of that has been mentioned, as far as I'm aware. Instead, we've got the same tired, but nevertheless shrill exhortations to racial justice, LGBTQI+, and of course the biggest scam of them all, climate change. What would have been, should have been in fact, an opportunity for most of us to put our differences aside and for one day, just one, indulge ourselves in the luxury of our shared nationhood. It has been said by some that there are only 22 countries in the world that have not been invaded by Britain at some point, so consequently we don't have an Independence Day. That's something other countries have. And since we are, I think, uniquely a family of nations, that has the effect of dividing rather than uniting us. The Irish in particular make quite a thing of St. Patrick's Day, but England's Day of St. George has become as much a tradition for lefties to tell us endlessly, and not to say increasingly tediously, that St. George was a Turk who never set foot in England. And since 58 million of the 68 million Brits are English, St. George's Day is, despite this, often a fairly muted affair. So a coronation is a chance for us all to have a genuine national day, one that we don't get very often, and one that is being denied us even before kick-off. And it will be denied us by the usual suspects. The Republicans will deny it us, as they always try to do, with anything to do with the monarchy. And although they have in the past been bad-temperedly negative, when the great bulk of the population have been overwhelmingly positive towards our previous and much-loved Queen Elizabeth II, they have at least been consistent in their principled objection to the very concept of monarchy. Now that Liz is gone, they will have an easier time of it. The anti-British, anti-Brexit lovies will continue, as they always have, to make disparaging remarks about the royals from what they think of the lofty heights of showbiz, as if that gives them some kind of moral authority. The embarrassed, foaming at the mouth, anti-British and virulently anti-Brexit media types will chime in with their endless tedium about Britain living in the past, with the ridiculous aspirations to empire, and why can't we, if we must have a monarchy, why can't we have a bicycle riding version just like those sensible Dutch types? And as an added bonus this time, we can also look forward to the obviously jealous, spiteful barbs of Team Sussex, who'll be searching endlessly for strategically placed candles, slights and insults towards their whiny woke champions, Harry and Meghan What's-Her-Face. And of course no royal occasion would ever be complete without the hate-filled bile of all the media's usual homegrown race-baiting regulars like Professor Kahindi Andrews and Yasmin Alawai Brown, now joined by newly infamous transatlantic versions like the US academic Uju Anya. But of all these regular and new malcontents that can be relied upon to attempt to ruin one of Britain's rare national days, there is one who is likely to deny us not just the coronation, but the future of the very kingdom itself. This person, perhaps more influential than any other, and with a constitutional, and in theory at least, a theological link to the Almighty, and therefore to that something better, has the power either to elevate himself and the kingdom with it, by providing the British people with something to believe in, or instead to utterly undermine the institution itself along with the society that supports it. This person, who has more to gain and also, remember, more to give, by supporting and swearing his allegiance to the society, to the country and to the people who should give his life a meaning that he is unlikely to find any other way, has seemingly instead chosen to take the side of the super-privileged billionaire class in their attempts to impoverish, imprison and enslave the subjects within his realm, as well as the countless millions outside it. Unfortunately, this person, sadly, disappointingly, and if it comes to pass as I fear, unforgivably, is the king himself.